We often assume that the bigger something is, the more impact it'll have on us. However, that's just simply not true. In fact, the most important thing that we use today is one of our smallest inventions. It's found in your computer, your phone, your car, and maybe even in your toothbrush. It's been used in military, medical, and scientific applications. That innovation is semiconducting materials that have been turned into electronic parts, such as chips, transistors, and microprocessors. Forget the wheel, because this is the most important thing that we could have ever made. Without it, the whole technological landscape as we know it would cease to exist. So what makes this tiny piece of technology so important? Why is semiconductor manufacturing becoming so problematic? Why are they so important for major tech companies? And why are world superpowers competing for their manufacturing and production? All these questions and more will be answered in this episode of That One STEM Podcast with your host, Bihan. Before we get to the question of why semiconductors are so important, we need to understand how they work in order to get the full picture. You probably know about insulators and conductors, most likely from science class back in high school. Insulators are materials which resist electrons passing through them, such as plastics, and conductors are materials which allow electrons to flow through them easily, such as metals like copper. Semiconductors, on the other hand, are slightly in between the two. Semiconductors can partially conduct electricity through them. Now, this is probably the point where you might be thinking about the usefulness of them. Wouldn't it just be more practical to have a material that can fully conduct electricity and vice versa? However, the thing is, this simple characteristic is why they're so sought after. According to the University of South Florida, semiconductors are generally made from silicon, and by altering their composition, which can be done by introducing impurities or defects, their conductivity can be altered. Due to this, semiconductors can be used to direct electricity, or in other words, create switches instead of manually separating circuits such as in a light switch. We can simply alter electron flow using semiconductors, and because of this, semiconductors are useful in computer technology as they can be used to create transistors. To explain this matter better, a computer receives instructions in binary code or in ones and zeros, with 1 representing on and 0 representing off. In the hardware end, transistors convey binary code by opening and closing circuits rapidly to process commands and execute instructions. While one transistor alone can't do much, several billions of them can execute complex computational tasks. Nowadays, the bulk of processing in an electronic device is done with CPUs and GPUs, which each store billions of transistors. Surprisingly, if you were to go back 40 years ago, we'd be only able to store a few tens of thousands of transistors on a chip. It's surprising to see such a leap in numbers. However, there's a phenomenon known as Moore's Law, which can easily explain why we're seeing this right now. According to an invited paper titled Science and Engineering Beyond Moore's Law states that every year we can expect to see the limit for transistors on a chip to double every year, which means that we can expect to see increasingly powerful computers which are able to handle more demanding tasks, such as running games or AI algorithms. And this leads us to our next point of why major tech companies are investing so much money into this sector. Now, as you may already know, AI is a rapidly developing field which could be the most impactful technology we've seen till date, as it can revolutionize healthcare, agriculture, environmental protection, defense, and other sectors. Due to this, companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google, and others are investing billions into developing their own AI models, such as Google's Gemini, Microsoft's Copilot, and more. As we continue to develop AI technology, we will need computers that will be able to run increasingly more demanding tasks as AI models will begin to demand hardware with more and more transistors. This is why tech companies are investing so much into semiconductors and chip manufacturing, because this will help them make more powerful AIs than their competitors. For example, on September 17th, 2024, Microsoft announced in its news release that it would be partnering with companies like BlackRock to put $100 billion in investment into the semiconductor industry. Now, that's a lot of money. And the reason why was because AI would need more infrastructure to run on. And they also have their own AI models, so you can clearly see the link why. However, there's a very big problem that's happening to semiconductors, and more specifically transistors, and it can't be solved simply by throwing money on it. Remember Moore's law? Well, there's something happening to it. As transistors become smaller and smaller so that more can be fit on a chip, they're also reaching the very limits of their size. According to a paper from the NASA Astrophysics Data System, transistors can't get any smaller because of a phenomenon known as quantum tunneling. Remember how I said transistors can switch the flow of electrons? Well, as they get smaller, electrons will develop the potential to jump to the other side of the transistor switch and render the transistor redundant. And the reason why is, again, because of quantum tunneling. In our episode about quantum computers, I had briefly gone over what quantum mechanics are and how quantum tunneling falls into this category, so I recommend that you check it out. Quantum tunneling works by manipulating the superpositional nature of electrons. Now, this pretty much means that since electrons can never be in a specific place, that means that at a switch, they could be behind it, be in the middle of the transistor switch, or after the switch. Due to this, a few electrons would be able to leak out from the transistor and negatively affect and mess up the accuracy of computers if transistor chips became too small, which means that we're nearing the end of what we're capable with standard silicon chips. This is why several startups are popping up aiming to change the status quo of the semiconductor landscape and secure a slice of the semiconductor market with different semiconductor transistors. Now, while the business side of semiconductors are interesting, there's one major point that we need to get to, and that is how semiconductors are currently a matter of national security for several countries worldwide, such as the USA and China. In fact, this matter is of such great importance that a major geopolitical issue is influenced by this, and that issue is of China's claim to Taiwan, in which the US staunchly opposes. In case you're unaware of this, here's a quick summary of the situation. For additional clarification, the source I'll be using is the information provided by the US Office of the Historian. Our story begins in mainland China in the mid-1990s, as a product of years between the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, and the Nationalist Party of China. A major civil war broke out. In 1949, the CCP was victorious and set up a government in mainland China, and the Nationalist Party ended up in the island province of Taiwan. Still, to this day, China claims Taiwan as Chinese Taipei, and Taiwan and its largest backer, the US, are strongly against this notion. However, there's one important piece of the puzzle that I intentionally left out. You see, the reason why the USA and other countries support Taiwan is because they are the main manufacturers of chips worldwide, with their company TSMC, or the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. While you may not have heard of it, according to a news article by The Guardian, TSMC makes 90% of all chips in the world and supplies companies like Nvidia and Apple. From the American standpoint, if China were to take over Taiwan, that would mean that it would have no access to the chips from TSMC, which is terrible for them technologically and would leave them significantly weakened. From Taiwan's standpoint, semiconductors are a way to defend against invasion, as other countries would want to protect Taiwan from Chinese invasion. From China's standpoint, they too don't want to engage in any sort of military action, as they would risk losing in on the chip exports from Taiwan, which is why China is making its own efforts to produce more chips to stop being reliant on Taiwan. According to the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, between the years 2021 to 2022, 55% of global semiconductor patent applications were of Chinese origin. This is partially due to the boom in Chinese semiconductor enterprises. However, their semiconductor development technology is behind that of the US or the EU, but only by around 2 years. However, as the US is not that interested in seeing China beat them to the market, in 2022, the US government created the CHIPS Act, which is an abbreviation of Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors for America Fund. In that act, around $52 billion were allocated to the research and manufacturing of semiconductors, not to mention the $200 billion put into investments in general semiconductor research and other fields. In summary, semiconductors are a thing of corporate interest and a matter of national security for many countries, since semiconductors are the reason why you're currently listening to this podcast, playing mobile games on your phone, and furthermore, allow for the existence of all electronic devices. Semiconductors are going to be a major sector and will continue to remain so for the foreseeable future. Thanks for listening in on this week's episode. If you've enjoyed it, feel free to like the episode and follow our podcast for more interesting episodes like this one. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at letustalkabout@outlook.com. And always have an amazing week. Till next time, this is your host, Vihan, signing off.